Hey everybody, Thomas Joseph here, and today we are tackling the ever-popular donut. Now, sometimes when you make donuts at home, they can end up really dense, or even worse, they can be super greasy. Well, today I'm going to share with you a few tips and tricks to making donuts at home. They might even be better than your neighborhood donut shop. So let's get started. All right, so the donuts that we're tackling today are yeast donuts, and really, yeast donuts are kind of my preference. There are cakey donuts and then there are yeast donuts. Yeast donuts are a little bit lighter in texture and kind of brioche-like, and so that's what we're making here today. Now, I have a half a cup of water that is at about 110 degrees. You want warm water that's anywhere between 100 and 110. I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of active dry yeast to the water here. And you want to make sure that you check you have yeast that is, 1, the correct type. This is active dry, it's not rapid rise or instant yeast. And you want to make sure that your yeast is still good. There should be a sell-by date or use-by date on the back of the package. But the real way to tell whether or not the yeast is still active is to proof it in this water here. And I'm adding a little bit of sugar to kind of get the process started. It's about a teaspoon of granulated sugar. I'm just going to give this a stir with the spoon, and this needs to sit for about 5 to 10 minutes, and it should puff up in the cup. It should be nice and creamy and lofty, and that's when you know that the yeast is still alive, still active, and is still going to make your donuts nice and light and airy. While the yeast is proofing over here, I'm going to work on the dry ingredients. So I have 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour here, and to that I'm gonna add a little bit of flavoring. Now, I'm using nutmeg today, and about a half a teaspoon is what I need, finely grated. And you might say, wow, a half a teaspoon of grated nutmeg, that seems like a lot. Well, actually, nutmeg is one of those spices that you might not know is in a lot of donuts, whether they're yeasted or they're cakey. It's that little signature flavor that will make you think you're having a donut at your favorite donut shop. So a half a teaspoon of nutmeg is probably about a half or a third of a normal size nutmeg. And grating nutmeg fresh is always really best, guys. The stuff that's already ground that you can buy in your supermarket sometimes doesn't have as much flavor to it. So that looks good. To this, I'm gonna add salt. So I need 2 teaspoons of coarse salt here. I'm gonna add 1/4 cup of sugar here. Again, this is regular granulated sugar that we're using. And I'm just gonna whisk these ingredients together. Now I'm just gonna create a well in the center of the flour with the whisk. And very much like if you were making pasta at home or something like that, we're gonna add the wet ingredients to the center of the well here, and then we're gonna work all of the ingredients together. So the yeast is almost ready here. I'm gonna crack my eggs. I need 2 eggs. These are room temperature, large eggs. And I'm just gonna break them up a little bit with the whisk. And then this can go right into the center of the bowl here, along with my yeast mixture. You can see, everybody, look at this. You can see that the yeast is alive, it's been activated, it's starting to proof and create those wonderful air pockets that are gonna end up adding lightness to our donuts. My last ingredient here is 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter that's at room temperature, and that can go right into the center. And I'm just gonna work this together with a rubber spatula until I get a nice kind of shaggy, sticky dough. Like a lot of those wonderful doughs like brioche or a pain de mie, which is a nice white milk bread, this donut is similar in that it has that wonderful richness from the eggs and the butter. Just work it together until you get all of the dry bits of flour worked into the dough, and then I'm going to turn this out onto my work surface and knead this dough for about 10 minutes until it's nice and smooth and elastic. Now you could certainly do this in the stand mixer if you had one using a dough hook, but sometimes it's nice to kind of get your hands dirty and actually make something without one of those machines. This looks pretty good. I'm going to sprinkle the work surface with some flour. Turn the dough out onto the surface. You can flour your hands a little bit. And now I'm just gonna knead the dough. And kneading is just the process of really working all of the moisture that you have in here into the flour. You're trying to fully saturate the gluten, which is the protein in flour, so that our donuts have nice strength and structure, which will create beautiful, lofty donuts in the end. So the process of kneading is folding the dough kind of over itself and then using the back palm of your hand to push forward and down. And then you just keep rotating your dough. And what this will do is it will help create that beautiful, silky, elastic dough that we're looking for. All right, guys, it's been about 10 minutes. The dough is nice and kind of smooth and elastic. It's gonna now rest in an oil brushed bowl with a little bit of plastic wrap on top in a warm spot. You wanna keep this away from any drafts for about an hour to an hour and a half until this has doubled in bulk. You really wanna give the dough enough time to rise. So, warm spot. So it's been an hour and a half and you can see the dough has it's like almost 2.5 times its original size. And you can see there are lots of wonderful bubbles and air pockets here in the dough. To know whether or not you've proofed your dough enough, what you can do is just take your finger and push it into the dough, and it shouldn't spring back on you. You should be able to continue to see the indentation in the dough, and that's when you know that you've proofed the dough enough. At this stage, I'm going to roll the dough out into about 1/4 inch thickness. Now use floured hands, flour the dough a little bit, flour your rolling pin. So this looks like 1/4 inch here. And I have a 2.5 inch cutter. This is just a standard biscuit cutter here. If you didn't have a biscuit cutter, you could also use a sharp edged glass if you have that. So I'm gonna punch out rounds of my dough and place these rounds on the flour lined baking sheet. And this recipe should yield about 20 to 22 of these 2.5 inch rounds. And you can, of course, re-roll the scraps. I would say maybe re-roll the scraps once. And you want to give a little bit of space around each of the donuts here so that they can puff up and expand. So these donuts need about 20 more minutes to really rise and puff on the baking sheet. And again, this process where we're allowing the dough to rest and proof is going to add to the lightness of these donuts. And while these donuts rest, what you're gonna do is you're gonna heat a large, heavy-duty, high-sided pot with about 3 to 3.5 inches of vegetable oil to 370 degrees Fahrenheit. My donuts have proofed nicely. This is about 20 minutes in a nice warm spot, and the donuts have doubled in size, in thickness. Now, one of the things that's really important in making sure that you have a donut that's not too greasy is to fry at the right temperature. Now, this is 370 degrees. It's a pretty high temperature in terms of frying, but you wanna make sure that you're at that temperature. Otherwise, what will happen if it's too low? The donut itself will start absorbing a lot of the grease. So maintaining your temperature at 370 is really important. Now, I'm gonna gently place my donuts into the oil here. You wanna make sure that you're being nice and gentle and delicate with the donuts because you don't wanna deflate them. They've just had the opportunity to rise and puff up, and we really wanna make sure that we keep the lightness. So don't be too aggressive in how you pick them up and place them in the pot. Now, I'm only gonna do half of what I have here because I don't want the oil temperature to dip down too much. So these take really not that much time at all, about a minute on each side, and you should be able to see around the edge of the donut a little line of brown, and that's when you know that you should flip your donuts over. Now, I like to use just a fork here, but you could use a chopstick, and they should have that nice, beautiful golden brown color. And I'm using vegetable oil here today, guys, and if you are open to it, you could certainly use shortening to fry your donuts in. Now, the one benefit I would say to using shortening is that when these donuts cool, shortening solidifies to a dry substance at room temperature, whereas oil still feels kind of liquidy or wet, which can sometimes have the appearance of being greasy. So these donuts are looking amazing. I mean, look at this one, you guys. Look at how beautiful, golden brown it is. It's puffed up. It's almost quadrupled in size here in the oil. And that's because all of those wonderful air pockets that we've created throughout the proofing process are now even gaining size in this hot oil. So these look good. I'm gonna transfer them to a wire rack over here that I have set over a rimmed baking sheet. And these need to cool slightly before we're going to fill these. I'm using raspberry jam today, but you could really fill them with so many different things. I'm gonna repeat the process with the other donuts I have here while these guys have a chance to cool. All right, guys, our donuts are out of the oil. They've had a chance to cool slightly. And now what you need to do is just puncture a hole in the side and just push it maybe halfway into the donut. And what this is gonna do is it's gonna create a little pocket or a little entryway for us to fill these. Now, I'm using raspberry jam today, but you could use your favorite filling here. You could use a lemon curd or a lime curd would be fantastic. Now, we used a 2.5-inch cutter today, but you could certainly make these donuts smaller, and you could also make them bigger if you wanted to. If you're gonna make them bigger, I would recommend that you cut them a little bit thicker, maybe 1/2 inch. So now, I have some strained raspberry jam here. You wanna make sure that your jam is strained because the seeds would get stuck in the piping tip. And this is a filling tip, which I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but you can get these online or at a specialty baking shop, and it's a fine, fine tip, an extra long tip that really works well whenever you're filling donuts or if you're making eclairs or cream puffs. It's a really great tool to have. So now you're gonna take your donuts, push the tip in, and you're gonna fill the donuts with the strained jam. Now you should be able to feel the donut kind of inflate with whatever the filling is that you're using, and that's when you know you have enough filling. Of course, you should make your way through all of the donuts and fill them with the jam. And then to kind of gild the lily here, I have a simple confectioner's sugar glaze that I'm using today, and you can make this with water, just regular confectioner's sugar with a little bit of water. You can add a little bit of vanilla extract to it, or you can make it with lemon juice. So if you're making lemon curd donuts, use lemon juice because it's an extra amount of flavor. So now take your donut, dip it right into your confectioner's sugar glaze. Just halfway is fine. And if the donuts are still a little bit warm, what will happen is the glaze will kind of melt down around the donut. It will be nice and perfectly even. And you should let this set until the glaze is pretty much dry. And that's how you'll get one of those classic, iconic donuts that have that like shattery glaze on top. So just let it dry. Now you can repeat the process with the rest of the donuts, but you know what? It's a hot donut. I can't wait to try this, and I want to show you guys what it looks like on the inside. I'm gonna go for it. Look at that. Beautiful, light, airy interior. You can see all of those wonderful air pockets. Look at how much jam is filled inside this donut, and the glaze is so amazing and sweet. There's nothing better than a homemade donut. Follow the tips and tricks here and you will have donut success at home, I promise you. Now, as always, if you have any kitchen conundrums, reach out to us using the hashtag kitchen conundrums and we will help you guys out. Enjoy your donuts, guys. And as always, guys, click like and subscribe.